What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my team selection for Game Week 33. So I'm going to take you through the team and talk through what luxury transfer I might make this week and why bench boost Game Week 34 isn't completely out of the question. And I'll also show you how I did in Game Week 32. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's get into it. So let's start with Game Week 32. I scored 65 points, which was enough for a massive green arrow. Do you know how many places I went up? 91. To be fair, that was enough to take me just inside the top 25k. Before this week, I was just outside, but there really wasn't that much movement at all for me. And it's been that case for a few weeks now. If I look back at my overall rank over the last kind of 5 to 6 weeks, I was 50k in Game Week 27. I went up to 24k in Game Week 28. I'm now about 900 places lower than I was in Game Week 28. So hardly any movement over the last few weeks. But I don't think that would have been different for many people unless you had, you know, Dubravka, Porro and Watkins, who did really well this week and who are probably low enough owned to move you up a good bit. If you didn't have them, then it probably was a week where you didn't go down or up by a huge amount. And most of the differential players that I had just didn't deliver, like Neto in goal. Did get a 4-pointer to be fair, but obviously not as much as players like Dubravka. Doughty got a 2-pointer. Darwin was 5. Solanke, who's been sold quite a lot recently, also got a 2-pointer. So I think for a lot of us to move up more than just like 91 places, we probably needed a bit of a captaincy swing. And there was only a 3-point difference between the 4 main captains, which were Palmer, Salah, Haaland and Son. So Son and Palmer scored 5, Salah and Haaland scored 8. In the end, and I was debating a lot on the deadline stream who to go for, I went for Son. And the reason was I knew he'd be the lowest owned and the lowest captained out of the 4. And that proved to be the case, and I was hoping for a bit of a differential. And he was a whisker away of getting a big haul. He did hit the post. His shot was saved by Sells and onto the post. That had gone in, it would have been a whole different story. But it didn't. These things happen. And in the end, I'm 3 points down from not going for Salah. I basically decided in the end I wasn't going to go for Palmer because he was going to be the highest owned. I was going to go for one of the other 3. In the end, I picked someone that scored exactly the same. The only there's 2 good things really, and that's Arsenal defence and Arsenal attack. Obviously, Saka only played about 60 minutes but scored a penalty, got a couple of bonus as well, clean sheet points. So he finished on 10 just from 1 goal, which is nice. And my double Arsenal clean sheet came in again, which is a Gabriel 6-pointer and a Saliba for 5. And they have been fantastic for me in a season where there's been so many weeks. People have put a question in for the game week preview saying, given there's no clean sheets for defenders, is it even worth using transfers on? Arsenal have ticked over, right? They haven't got, you know, a ton more than everyone else, but they've got enough and they've chipped in with attacking returns as well. And I've had that double up since game week 12, and I've just not had to worry about those 2 players. I've been able to focus transfers in other places. So that's been great for me. I'm a little bit worried about wildcard 35, where the most Arsenal defenders I'll have is 1, and I may even end up with 0, but there's a couple more weeks till we get to that point. So Arsenal good. Everyone else just a bit, you know, it was okay, but nothing too exciting. I'm in the side of top 25k, which is not bad at all, but I'd like to get some movement and a big green arrow. So let's see if it's going to happen in Game Week 33. So I didn't make any transfers last week. So for Game Week 33, I've got 2 free transfers and 1 million in the bank. And just a quick reminder about my strategy. I'm dead ending into Game Week 34, so I'm only worried about this week and next. And then I'm going to wildcard in Game Week 35 and probably bench boost in Game Week 37. Now, I say probably because I've had some last-minute thoughts about possibly bench boosting in Game Week 34. I've got very lucky so far with injuries and stuff like that, to the point where this week I've potentially got a luxury transfer and I can get quite close to a decent enough bench in Game Week 34. I think what's going to put a spanner in the works is Trent Alexander-Arnold, because I don't think Bradley's going to be a great option for 34. And to deal with him and to get a decent bench, I'm probably going to have to take a -4. Whereas for Game Week 37, because I'd wildcard in Game Week 35, it wouldn't cost me any hits to get to a decent bench. So I don't think I'm going to do it, but the idea has been planted. And the reason that I'm tempted by it is because on wildcard 35, that would let me get Raya, Gabriel and Saka. I could just bench them for 35 and possibly 37 as well, but have them for Bournemouth at home in 36, and then also have them for Game Week 38. And as long as the title race stays open, having a triple up on Arsenal is something that I would like. I could do it, you know, wildcard 35 and bench boost 37, but then my bench in 37 wouldn't be quite so good. So that's why I'm considering bench boost 34. Essentially, if it all went to plan, it would be Neto and Zabani against, double up on Bournemouth against Wolves and Villa away, Palmer against Arsenal away, and then the third player would be a Wolves defender, either Aït-Nouri or Kilman or someone like that. Potentially, it could be a Crystal Palace or an Everton defender, but that's what that final spot would be. Is it ideal bench boosting with Palmer against Arsenal away? Not really, but I don't think it's the end of the world, especially when I get a better team outside of the doubles from 35 to 38. So it's something I'm considering. I think I'll end up on bench boost 37, but it's an option. And I don't think it really changes my transfer this week. So the team, as it stands, is Neto in goal, Man United at home, and then Areola on the bench, Fulham at home. As far as we know, Areola is still out. We'll have to wait and see what David Moyes says. Fabianski will probably start on Thursday in their European match anyway, right? Because he usually plays those games. But if Areola's on the bench, then maybe there's an option that he could play in 33. I'm not sure I'll risk it unless David Moyes is super positive. So one of the moves I could make is Areola to a double Game Week 34 goalkeeper that's not Neto. Because I don't mind having to play Neto, and I wouldn't go out of my way to bench him, or I wouldn't start taking -4s to not play him. But I've got a luxury transfer potentially this week, so I could go for Dean Henderson at Palace or Jordan Pickford at Everton. So I'm tempted to do that, and then when I get to 34, I can either choose to bench boost, or I just play whoever I bring in ahead of Neto. Either way, for this week, Game Week 33, I'm going to play Neto in goal, I think. In defence, I've got Gabriel and Saliba against Aston Villa at home. A bit like last week, right? I don't necessarily expect Arsenal to get a clean sheet in that game because Villa can cause them problems, but they're missing Douglas Luiz. That's going to be not great for them. He's suspended. And the Arsenal defence is incredible. I know they've conceded twice to Bayern Munich, but that's a whole different kind of level in the Champions League, quarterfinal, knockout games and stuff like that. I wouldn't be completely surprised if Arsenal get a clean sheet this week, but it's not necessarily something that I'm expecting. But on the bench, it's Zabani against Man United at home or Doughty against Man City away. So I haven't really got better options anyway. And Gabriel Saliba can also go and get me attacking returns as well. I've got Connor Bradley against Crystal Palace at home in the 11 as it stands. Trent is back in training. Is he going to play against Crystal Palace at home? I think a lot of that will depend on how many minutes he gets tonight against Atalanta. If Trent's on the bench and he comes on and gets like 20, 30 minutes, that might be enough to start him against Palace. But I don't think it's a guarantee. So I'm a little bit unsure about what to do with Bradley. I only have $1 million in the bank. There's not a huge amount I can do with him until I free up money. I'd like to get Van Dijk, but the plan to do that is Game Week 34 by dropping Son. So when I do Son to Eze, that's going to give me enough money to do Bradley to Van Dijk. So I don't really want to have to deal with it this week because I don't want to have to sell Son, but I haven't really got too many other options. So if I think Trent is going to start, or even if Trent's not going to start, but Bradley's not in the team, then I'm probably going to do Zabani or Doughty. Well, I would definitely do Doughty, right, because he doesn't have a double in 34. Doughty to probably Aït-Nouri if he's fit, and then play him this week and just have him as a backup for Game Week 34. Again, keeping the bench boost option open. So that's probably going to be the moves. I'm either going to do Areola to Henderson or Pickford, or if I don't think Bradley starts, I'm going to do Doughty to Aït-Nouri and then deal with Bradley in Game Week 34 instead. Either way, I'm pretty certain this week I'm going to play Neto, Gabriel, Saliba. It's just about that third defender. I think I've got quite lucky with Bradley because I bought him in Game Week 25 and he's been an option this whole time. He hasn't necessarily got me a huge amount of points. These things happen sometimes. But if I could just get one more game out of him, which I've said plenty of times before, against Palace at home, that would be a great result for me. And then I can just get rid of him in 34. But there's a chance that Aït-Nouri comes in. If he is not fit, then I would probably go... I don't know if I would go maybe for I maybe go for like Mikalenko at Everton instead, possibly a little bit more attacking than Kilman, because both Everton and Wolves have got a difficult fixture in 34. Right, one's got Arsenal, one's got Liverpool. The other option is to go for Munoz at Crystal Palace because they've got 2 home games. I'm just not sure how much I trust their defence either. So as you can tell, when you've got a luxury transfer but there's nothing obvious to do, that's why it's a luxury move. There's lots of options, but it'll all come down to how many minutes Trent gets tonight. If he's not in the squad or something like that, or he doesn't come on, then I think it'd be very unlikely he would start against Palace, in which case I'll risk Bradley and just make the goalkeeper move. So in midfield, I've got Palmer against Everton at home, Salah against Palace at home, Son against Newcastle away, and then Saka against Villa at home. As I've said a few times already this week, I don't have too many worries about Saka starting that game. I know he wasn't in the squad at all against Luton, but he's straight back in against Brighton. He plays the 90 minutes against Bayern. I'm pretty confident he'll start against Villa and then play the Bayern Munich game as well. Is there a chance that he comes off early against Aston Villa to save him for that Champions League game? Absolutely. But with a double in 34 and my strategy of obviously dead ending into that week, there's just no point in using a transfer on him unless he's absolutely confirmed out. So you could make a case that at the moment Odegaard and Havertz, because of minutes, are slightly better options, but it's just not worth a transfer for me. So Saka will be staying. As I mentioned with Son, I am going to move him despite losing money on him for Game Week 34 because Spurs are going to blank, and then I'm going to wildcard him straight back in for Game Week 35. I could make the move this week and just upgrade Bradley to Van Dijk and be done with it, not worry about buying like an 8 Muri or a Branthwaite or Mikalenko, whoever it might be. But I think Son against Newcastle away is a good fixture. I think he will get space and he probably will play as the number 9 again. We know he's on penalties, minutes, etc. All that stuff we talk about a lot. So I don't really want to have to sell him this week. One luxury move that people talked about on my stream on Sunday was doing Son to Foden for Luton at home before then selling Foden on in Game Week 34. But I just think with that injury against Real Madrid, there's just no point in doing that. He might be fine, of course, and he may start against Luton, but he is one of the players that would then be susceptible to coming off early, and it might be that they just don't risk him at all. It's hard to know because the injury didn't look great at the time, and he didn't look that comfortable, but then he's just saying it's a dead leg and hopefully he'll be okay. So we can't quite be sure. I think if I had Foden, I'd probably just start him unless we get more news, but I just don't think it's worth transferring him in. And I just like Son this week anyway, so I really want to put off that move to next week, which is why I talked earlier about going for a goalkeeper move or even just a bench defender move, even if I don't end up playing them in 34. So Son will probably stay, but he'll definitely go in Game Week 34 unless something weird happens, but I can't even imagine what would need to happen for me not to sell him. Salah, some people are saying he's not been great recently. The form's not quite there. I'm not particularly worried just because Salah's great, essentially. And anytime players like that get talked about for form, they always find a way to score. It's at Anfield. Crystal Palace is a great fixture. He's got a double in 34. There's just no point in even worrying about it. And it was only a couple of games ago against Brighton that we're talking about how he should have had more returns. He's looking great. We've got to get him in. I appreciate that he wasn't great against Sheffield United. He wasn't particularly good against Man United, I would say, either. Not for his standards. But it's just not a worry, like, whatsoever. And I think there's even a case to possibly be made to captain him this week, depending on how many minutes he gets tonight against Atalanta, right? If he's on the bench, which I don't think is likely, but if he is, then all of a sudden he's kind of rested for that Palace game, and that starts to look really nice versus Haaland, who's got Luton at home, and I'll come on to him in a minute. And by the way, there's no harm in captaining Haaland. I'm just saying I think Salah is an option. Like, that's how little I'm worried about his form, that I may even switch the captaincy armband to him. And then Cole Palmer, there's just no point talking about him. He's just fantastic. The price is ridiculous. He's got 2 double game weeks to come before the end of the season. I'm just not selling him. I will bench him in Game Week 34. I think for some people, especially if you got on him a little bit later in terms of price, it may make sense to sell him and then buy him back on wildcard like I'm doing with Son, possibly even Haaland as well. But for me, I got Palmer at 4.9, so I just don't want to sell him, and I just don't think I'm going to have to. Because my plan for 34 is to have Saka, Salah, Eze, and I've got Sarabia already on the bench, so I can just put Palmer on the bench and play 3-4-3. So it's kind of worked out really nicely for me. Obviously had a little bit of luck along the way. And if someone does miss out, okay, my defenders don't look great on the bench, but having to play Sarabia against Forest away is no issue at all. And then up front, I've got Haaland against Luton at home, who's currently got the captain's armband. Darwin against Palace at home, and then Solanke against Man United at home. Now, with Darwin and Solanke, they've both got doubles in Game Week 34, so they're just another 2 players that I don't really have to think about. Solanke hasn't been fantastic over the last couple of games, but Man United will give up chances, and then it's Villa and Wolves away in 34, which is not necessarily a difficult double game week or anything like that. Would I like Isak this week against Spurs at home? Absolutely, but there is no need to bring him in and then take him out again for 34 on my strategy. It just doesn't make sense. With Darwin, a bit like Bradley, there is another player now back in Liverpool training that's going to cause somewhat of an issue, and that is Diogo Jota. And I think at times, Liverpool could have done with him recently, because I think Darwin is great, right? And his goal record and assist record this season has actually been fantastic. But sometimes in those games, like against Man United, when you're getting loads of chances, it's just not going in. You need someone like Jota who just seems to have a bit of a cooler head in front of goal. So he could cause some problems in terms of minutes for both Darwin and Diaz. But it's just not worth worrying about for me. Like, Darwin is fully fit at the moment. Jota's only just coming back. The double game week is next week. It's just not worth using transfers. Even if you're on a free hit, right, you're going to want 3 Liverpool players. One's going to be Salah. One's probably going to be Van Dijk. Then you're picking a third. So even if you go for like Jota, Diaz or Darwin, you can't be any more sure about the minutes than those of us that are already sat here with those, 2 attackers in Darwin and Diaz. Unless you go for someone like McAllister, but I'm just not particularly worried about him. So it could cause an issue with the minutes. We may see Darwin start against Palace and then only start 1 game in the double, but that's more than enough reason to kind of keep hold of him. And again, there's just no point in moving on. Like, if you had Darwin now and you were free hitting in 34, maybe you'd switch him to Isak if you didn't have him to use a transfer to prepare yourself for 37. But on my strategy, it's just fairly straightforward, unfortunately. And this is in some ways quite a boring stage of the season because everything's kind of set out for me because I know who's doubling 34. It gets a bit more interesting from game week 35. With Haaland, is there a chance that he gets rested against Luton because the Real Madrid tie is in the balance and they've got to play again next week? Yes, but I'm not particularly worried because it's a Tuesday to Saturday and then Saturday to Wednesday turnaround. It's a pretty good gap for Man City. And as someone pointed out to me, I think it was yesterday, at this point, Haaland probably just needs minutes and goals rather than having a rest. He just missed out against Aston Villa. And look, it's a bit like Salah, right? If I was a Man City fan, I wouldn't be particularly worried about Haaland. At some point, he's going to start scoring plenty of goals. But it hasn't happened recently. He wasn't particularly great against Real Madrid. Rudiger did really well against him. Gabriel and Saliba did really well when they played Arsenal. Obviously, he missed the Villa game. He did score against Palace, but he hasn't had a huge amount of goals recently, which doesn't worry me from an FPL point of view, but it does make me think he's going to start that Luton game. Absolutely, he's going to come off early. I do not expect him to play 90 minutes, but 60, 70 minutes against Luton could be more than enough. So that's why he's got the captain's armband. Unless we find out he's not starting, I just don't see how I can captain him. Look what happened in the FA Cup, right? He scored 5 goals. I'm not expecting that to happen again, but the Luton defence won't necessarily just be able to sit in and just stop that, right? And if they go for it at any point, that just plays into Man City's hands. I also think De Bruyne is going to start, which is kind of helpful for Haaland too. We may see Rodri get benched, which is interesting. There was talk that he said he needs a rest, and he said something like, I'm not going to go through what I did last season. I'm kind of paraphrasing a lot there, but basically he wants more of a rest than last year. Now, that can come just from early subs, right? I think he got subbed off against Crystal Palace, so it's not necessarily a case that he's going to miss a bunch of games in the run. I don't think he'll miss many at all, but he might miss Luton. Would that be enough for me to not captain Haaland? I'm not sure that's the excuse I'm looking for. I think for me to switch the armband, it's Salah being rested tonight and then doubts about Haaland starting. But as it stands, I think he's just going to play. If he doesn't start, then things get interesting because, again, I've got that luxury transfer. I've got 2 options. I could just bench Haaland and play Sarabia and then just have Haaland ready for Brighton in game week 34. So I don't think he would miss that game, right? That's a bit more difficult than Luton at home. Or I could use one of my transfers on Haaland to Mateta and have Mateta ready for game week 34. Obviously, that would mean I don't have Haaland, but that is a move I can make. And in that case, I would still play Sarabia. The other option is just to get a good single game weeker in for game week 33 and then just also play them in 34 and not get Haaland back. So, for example, I could go for, Tony against Sheffield United. I could go for Isak against Spurs. And both of those play. So for Isak, he would have Spurs then Crystal Palace, which is not that bad. And then for Tony, who's going to be right down on the list, let me just double check here. I think it's Luton away. Yeah, so Sheffield United at home and Luton away. So rather than go for a double game week player for 34 that I would bench this week anyway, I could just go for a player with a better fixture. So Tony or Isak this week are probably better than Sarabia. So that's an option as well. But as much as I was there was part of me that almost wanted Haaland to be benched so I could get an extra double game weeker in. I think at this point it's just easier for me if he plays against Luton, and then I can just go for my defender or goalkeeper transfer that keeps bench boost 34 as an option, which I don't think I'm going to go for, as I've already said, But I do like the idea of it, like I said, it being open as an option. So I'm pretty sure my move, if Trent isn't going to start Palace, it's going to be Areola to Henderson or Pickford, but probably Henderson because he's got 2 good home games in the double. And if Trent is going to start, I'm probably going to do Doughty to 8 Nuri and just bench Bradley and then deal with him in game week 34. Pretty simple week for me. And in 34, I already know my moves. It's going to be Son to Eze and Bradley to Van Dijk. And I have triple Arsenal, triple Liverpool, Sarabia, Eze, Solanke, and then probably Haaland up front against Brighton, which is fine, and Neto in goal. So yeah, I think things, unless there's chaos, injury, suspensions and stuff like that over the next couple of game weeks, I'm pretty set. And I've known these moves for weeks now. And that's what happens when the double game week's locked in. You just get focused on those players and there's not really too much else to think about. Wildcard 35 will be a bit more interesting because although there's certain teams we're targeting, which of the players from those teams you triple up on is definitely an interesting discussion. But until then, it's just fairly straightforward. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast, and I'll catch you again tomorrow for final thoughts.